So let's now, we're really getting into the meat of the IEP, talk about long-term goals and short-term goals. So long-term goals can be intermediate or long-term. A long-term goal doesn't mean this year. It can be a couple of years or 5 years. It's kind of aiming high in the future, and then the short-term goals are approximations to work towards that larger goal. The image you see up here is Dr. Peter Gerhardt. And Peter Gerhardt is a senior colleague of mine. He's from New York, and he likes working with teenagers and adolescents around really difficult issues, sexuality issues. And he always makes fun of you people who like to work with the little kids. That's easy. Give me a great big burly guy who's got masturbation issues, and I want to work with that kid. So he's like a street fighter kind of special educator. And one of the things that he said that really resonated with me, I've had a number of experiences over the last few years where I've been at the IEP meeting, intimately involved in coming up with the IEP. We've met at the end of the year, and for a few of the objectives, we're looking at it together, myself and the learning support teacher, going, what did we mean by that? What goal are we aiming at? That's not clear. I mean, we created this together. We were in the same room, but neither of us can remember what this goal was for. It seemed like a good idea at the time. We convinced the parent to sign off on it, but we can't remember now. And I learned something from Peter and his recommendation, and I really incorporate this in my practice and heavily recommend it, is to add in order to lingo to the long-term objective, right? He's gonna learn social skills, period. Why? Where's this going? Peter Gerhardt recommends he's gonna learn social skills in order to make and establish friendships, right? It just provides more context and rationale for why we have this goal, and it helps us remember, especially at the end of the year, why we thought it was such a good idea in the first place. And I've integrated that feedback from him, and I've been heavily reinforced for it. It works, I can tell you. So long-term goals, transitions. By grade 5 or 6, be thinking about high school. So as I've added this in here just so that we have a long-term lens as we're coming up with goals for our students. Because I work with kids from kindergarten through grade 12, and I've worked through the transitions, and I see where things get dropped and priorities shift. So by grade 5 or 6, be thinking about high school. What I tend to see happen across a multitude of school districts is I'm working with my student in grade 7, and we've got our IEP, and it's been a work in progress over several years, and then the next year we go to high school, and in grade 8, they don't even really look at the last IEP. They create an entirely new plan in high school, because we're in high school now. The contingencies have shifted, the classes are different, the services are different, and I've seen this over and over again now that it's actually had a learning effect on me where why are we investing time in grades 6 and 7 on things that are gonna die when they go to high school? There's no point in doing these things if they're not going to be continued. So we should start thinking more about integrating things that are going to survive the transition to high school and then have relevance and be picked up and continue in high school. So the punchline here is be thinking ahead, especially around transitions. When you get to high school, from the beginning of high school, every goal you should be thinking about, that in order to, how is it going to matter after high school? My way of framing goals in high school is everything we do now. First of all, high school is a 5-year period that's going to pass in an instant. And you've got these 5 years of resources you'll never have again to prepare the student for the next 60 years of their life, right? If we're getting them ready for, the goal of high school is to get ready for adulthood. Adulthood is going to go on for decades and decades. So we shouldn't be doing anything esoteric in high school. Everything in high school, the goal should be, we're going to look back 2 years after graduation and be thankful that we did this. It's going to matter, as opposed to looking back and like, what did we do for all those years? Nothing that really matters now that we're in out of the high school system. So it has to have survivability. And the best way to do this is to imagine a crystal ball. And I'll talk with parents early in high school. Where is he going to live? What's he going to do? Is he going to have friends? What's his life going to be? Is he going to have leisure skills? Right? What's he going to do for fun? Imagine that. And it's really difficult in grade 8 because you're just thinking about getting through grade 8. But we have to start thinking much earlier about the future and then reverse engineering. Right? If this is your goal, right, aim high. We don't know where we'll get, but aim high. And then let's reverse engineer back to what can we do now that's going to be an evolutionary process over time to get there in the future, right? A long-term perspective. Here's a problem. Murray's in grade 12. This is a real kid that I consult with, a student in grade 12. High-functioning ASD. He had SEA about half the time that he was in his high school classes. And by the way, when I work in the university system, I often see students who have high-functioning autism who've come out of high school. They're bright. They've been admitted to university based on academic merit. They're intelligent, but they had an SEA all of grade 12. And when they get to university, they have 0 SEA. And what happens? They flunk out in the first term, right? Because they were too reliant on their SEA. Even though they were high-functioning and doing really well in high school, there wasn't enough thought to the fact that the resources enabling that success will die a death at graduation. They won't be available in the next setting. There's no such thing as SEAs in university. So again, planning. So Murray's in grade 12. He has an SEA half-time. We've talked with his family. We know that he's not university bound, and we're not selling him short, but he's not going to go to university. He doesn't want to go to university, but there's no reason that he can't be a taxpayer, real work for real pay, not charity work, and contribute and live at least semi-independently. That would be my goal for Murray. However, here's his IEP goals in grade 12. Calculating the circumference of a sphere, identification of possessive pronouns in literature. He's doing Shakespeare units. Those don't match up with what's going to matter 12 months from now. This will not matter 12 months from now. So why is it a goal? It will not generalize or maintain. It has no survivability. So this is a problem. He can't ride a bus. We start talking with mom and dad about, well, maybe he can work outside of the home. Well, it'll be difficult to drive him. Well, you live near Metro Town. There's lots of transit. Well, he doesn't take the bus. He doesn't take SkyTrain. He's fed. All of his meals are prepared for him. He has no independent skills. He's a really nice guy. He's got a lot of intelligence and skills and abilities, but none of the things that he's going to need to be successful as an adult. There is zero work placement planned aside from a few kind of menial jobs around the school. So this is the situation that you want to avoid. We don't want to be supporting kids like Murray when you get to grade 12, where suddenly we're at the end of this very well-resourced, relatively well-resourced system that it won't be replicated after he leaves, and there's still so much more important stuff we want to do. So that's the difference between a traditional academic curriculum, which is what the culture fosters, versus having the flexibility to break out of that and have more of a functional goal. We really need to be thinking much more broadly as we move into high school and then certainly all the way through high school for what follows high school. I went to a talk at ABA International a few years ago. I was talking about, are we meeting our obligation to students with ASD? Peter Gerhardt, who I mentioned, gave a bit of a talk. This is one of his slides. And he talked about some cases where students will be doing well and we are meeting their needs. But he said, the answer to this is no. After 18 years of ABA-based education and upwards of $1.5 million in special education costs, the now adult with ASD continues to require direct intervention in the areas of showering, toileting, dressing, eating, and meal prep, has no or minimal repertoire of independent community skills, can't go out in the community, has no or minimal repertoire of functionally relevant leisure skills, can't keep himself busy, continues to require someone other than themselves to deliver reinforcement. So it needs someone who needs to be on a token system all the time to maintain appropriate behavior, can't just kind of occupy himself, self-regulate, so to speak. Can name all 50 states, has 300 sight words, can identify coins by value, but will leave the environment with a stranger in a heartbeat. Right? Where have we placed our priorities and where should they have been? Right? And so this is a powerful message from the end of the education road and making sure that we're at a place where we want to be as we move into the next 6 decades of life. Related to that, in schools, one-to-one support is the gold standard, right? I advocate for my students to have one-to-one support. I help advocate for my client families to get one-to-one support. We want one-to-one support, but it's not the be-all and end-all, and there are problems with it. As you move out of high school into the adult system, the average level of staffing in, say, group homes and sheltered workshops and places like that is 1 adult to around 8 adult clients with autism. And so if a person has been successful with one-to-one support and you're setting them up to go into a situation where it's going to be 1/8 of that, we're not setting them up for success. We need to be thinking about the supports we have. There's that analogy of the Velcro aid, right? You don't want an SEA who's Velcroed to the kid. You need to increase distance. You need to increase independence. We need to often be thinking more beyond that. I mean, our students shouldn't be looking for the SEA if they're not available, dependent on them, asking for them. Those are little cues that show us that as positive as it may be in many regards, we are fostering this dependency on the one-to-one aids. So it's a progression again. It's an evolution over the school years. Quite often early in the school years, it's a really very, very beneficial thing to have one-to-one supports. But we have to have a long-term perspective that we don't maintain that through grade 12. We have to start at some point pulling back and fading that out, having other people, more than one SEA, because that's what the rest of their life will be. We're not preparing them for the rest of their life if it's that one ABA-trained SEA 35 hours a week all the way through, right? In the short term, that looks really good. In the long term, you're going to look back on that probably and see that as a bit of a mistake. So what needs to shift? Shift from one-to-one teaching. Teach group skills. Teach our kids to be in the classroom instead of one-on-one in another setting. Teach community skills, meaning spend more time in the community, especially as we move into high school. The point I have here about being tied to the school blocks. Most high schools have 4 blocks through the day. 80 minutes, 90 minutes. And if you're going to go on an outing, you need to be back before the next block because you need to be in the next thing. Well, it might be more important for the student to take the bus independently to Safeway and buy stuff and come back, even if it takes 2 or 3 blocks, than have to worry about these arbitrary time units, right? Because again, high school is this relatively short-term, highly artificial setting that does not represent reality after high school. So why are we worried about adhering to the schedule system in high school? For a lot, unless a student is fully integrated into their academic settings and is university bound, then they should be on schedule, right? But for the other kids more impacted by their autism, free yourself from that schedule, right? Don't limit the student's opportunities by the arbitrary schedule. Focus on true independence. For example, I ask an SEA who works with a student, what's his independence like with the shopping routine? Because he's supposed to leave the school, get on the bus, go to Safeway, buy 4 things, pay with his debit card, and then come back. And the response might be, he's done really, really well. He's totally independent. Especially when it started with hand-holding the entire way and full prompting. This person's thinking he's come a long way and say, well, I just have to tell him to get his wallet, and then we walk out to the bus together, and we sit on the bus, and I just follow him at a distance, and I stand with him at the cash register so we don't get separated, and then we go back to school together. He's totally independent. No, it's way better than when you started, but it's nowhere near independent. Independent means you stay at school. Gasp, what do you mean? You're going to let him go out there by himself? Isn't that what adulthood is? And I often have conversations with the families I work with around teaching transit skills as a predictor of adult success. And universally, without exception, the color drains out of mom's face when I talk about taking the bus. No way, I can't envision that. That's scary. I understand it looks that way now, but we're not talking about sticking him out on the bus and saying bye right now. We're going to have a scripted plan. We're going to have full supports and then incrementally fade those based on his success at his level. We'll never abandon him, right? But we'll fade it out, and with the goal being he could just take his card and go and come back, right? That's what we're shooting for. If we fall short of that, okay. But that's what we're looking for. That's true independence, so that no one is with you. Because if I go with my student on the bus, I might not tell him we have to get off at the next bus stop, but I'm probably sending some subtle cues, right? I'm probably doing more looking as we get close. I might be getting my jacket as we get one stop away. All of those are prompts. That's not independence. He could be just totally daydreaming and thinking, Richard's getting up, I have to get off now, right? That's why I want to stick him on the bus. One of my students, as we taught him the bus, his EAs went with him and then started to follow in their car. And then they would drive ahead and watch to make sure he got off. And we slowly faded out the supports. A funny thing happened. The EA spent several weeks following the bus in his car, and the bus driver phoned the police. There's this creepy guy following my bus every day. He's watching this one boy get on and off. So the police pulled him over. What are you doing, sir? And so he had to explain, I'm following that kid. What do you mean you're following that kid? Right? So be careful when you go out there and do that. But we can teach true independence. Less focused on academics. Whether you can compose poetry, anything about Shakespeare, there's not a whole lot of math you need aside from using money when you leave. So really, what is our priority? Predictors of adult success may not be what you think. So bathing, cleaning, and cooking are greater predictors than academic success, right? You need to have some leisure skills. You have to have a quality of life as an adult. Transit skills, again, are critical. It's a major predictor for someone, for their ability to be independent and have real work for real pay and not be a charity case, but to actually be a taxpayer. And I envision that as the goal for the majority of the kids I work with. At the very least, be a taxpayer. Basic literacy, to understand instructions, to seek information. To access employment programs at universities, a lot of the universities will have one-year employment programs for people with autism. They have to have a grade 4 or 5 literacy level. And so by the end of grade 12, if I've got grade 5 literacy, that opens the door for a bunch of services after high school. If we don't have grade 4 or 5 literacy, we're closing doors before we even get there. So we should be thinking about these in elementary school. We're not going to have that one-to-one SEA forever. A quick plug for a great resource. Dr. Partington has the Assessment of Functional Living Skills. He's got these 6 different protocols. Each of these is a curriculum in its own right for independence that you should start looking at in elementary school. So there's basic living skills around the house. Basic living skills, which is pretty generic across all areas of development. Home skills, contributing around the home. Community participation skills, being able to go out in public. There's a whole curriculum on school skills, just to be an effective student. Independent living skills, and there's a new protocol on vocational skills as you get into high school, working towards real work for real pay. So let's do some long-term goal activity. Because of our time, we'll do this as a large group. So we're going to go through and write better long-term goals, adding this in order to language. This is in the behavioral skills training where we get into some modeling. So I'm going to show you some generic examples, and I encourage you, if you're here for an elementary, middle school, high school student, to be thinking about your student and make some notes about how you could do this for your particular student whose IEP you're going to be writing in a few weeks. So a poor goal is Freddie will learn to read. It's poor because it lacks specificity. Right? What does read mean? If he learns to read at the end of the year the word cat, he's met this goal. Is that what you meant? No, that's not what you meant. So you need to add in order to. Freddie will learn to read in order to access information, read for leisure, comic books, magazines, and access vocational programs after high school. So this is clearly a long-term goal for a student impacted by autism to such an extent that he's probably not going to go to university. This is a functional life long-term goal, right? Access information, right? I can just read road signs. Read for leisure. You don't have to read Stephen King. You don't have to read heavy stuff. If you read a magazine, that's still a type of functional literacy, right? Not everyone has to read novels. Social long-term goal. Freddie will improve his social skills. Well, technically, if he says please once by the end of the year, that is an improvement in his social skills. Is that what you meant? No, it's not what you meant. So you can improve this long-term goal by adding the in order to. Freddie will learn social skills to establish and maintain peer relationships. That makes a whole lot more sense, right? That's why we're teaching him social skills. Not to get along with his SEA or his mom or dad necessarily, not an adult, but to establish and maintain peer relationships. And that could be one peer relationship. You just have to have one good friend to have a social life, right? Language and communication. Freddie will increase his language. Terrific goal, right? If he says one new thing, he's increased his language. That's not what we meant. Freddie will learn receptive and expressive communication skills in order to participate in classroom lessons. Right? If this is an early elementary goal, that makes sense. That's why we're increasing these skills, so he can functionally participate in the classroom, because we want to integrate him more. That's much better than just increasing his language. I hope you're starting to see now the utility of adding in order to our long-term goals. Freddie will learn toileting skills. So if he pees once in the toilet or he stays dry one day, that's, learning some toileting skills. It's better if you say Freddie will learn all aspects of the toileting routine in order to live independently with dignity. That's a nice, concise goal, right? If he's completely independent in toilet training, he'll have independence and he'll have dignity, and that will also protect him from the risk of abuse in the future, because he doesn't have to be in a state of undress with an adult attending to his toileting needs, right? Independence is also safety in the future. Freddie will learn to use a schedule. Better if you say Freddie will learn to follow a written schedule in order to have predictability in his day and greater independence. That provides a bit more of a framework and a context for why this goal is important, right? He'll be able to follow maybe a written schedule, it says here. You could add visual schedule so that he is less dependent on his SEA. This goes hand in hand with that earlier message of we need to break the Velcro much, much earlier and to a greater degree. Freddie will learn to type and print. Pretty vague. Let's make it better. Freddie will learn how to type on a keyboard in order to communicate with others via email and access information. Freddie will also learn to print a legible signature in order to sign forms. This actually comes from one of the high school students that I've worked with, where we spent years and years doing handwriting, and functionally it became clear that he doesn't actually have to use a whole lot of handwriting. We've invested a lot in his handwriting. It's not a skill he's going to use much other than to sign forms. And so it was most important for his family that he could do signatures to sign forms, CLBC forms, et cetera, as he moves into adulthood. But typing was really important because that allowed him to email his grandma and text with his mom. And the other thing that we often don't think about is social media. When we talk about social skills, well, high school students, elementary school students these days, a large part of their social experience is online. And if our students aren't online, no matter how annoying social media might seem to you, right? I don't do Facebook and things like that. It's annoying. But if we don't allow our students to participate, we're removing them from those social opportunities, right? I've got one of my kids, my client kids, who he goes on Skype with one of his friends from elementary school, and he's now in high school, but he maintains this relationship with this really nice boy, typically developing boy from his prior school. And he has computer skills to invite him on Skype and chat with him, and he can email and he can set up a chat, right? It's a really nice little relationship. Snapchat, Instagram, things like that. These skills will enable some type of social approximation in those realms. Take-home message, in your IEP meetings, you will come up with some good long-term goals. In order to remember why they were good long-term goals, please add the in order to language. Now, that's a fairly straightforward message here, right? That'll improve your long-term goals. What should long-term goals be? Because I sometimes go into IEPs that are, 16 pages long, 20 pages long. There might be, 10 or 11, 12 long-term goals. All long-term goals should have a subset of short-term goals. And really, if you've got that many long-term goals and corresponding short-term goals, you don't have enough time to teach all of this. You have to be a bit more selective. So how can we whittle it down to kind of a core base of long-term goals? So if you look at the National Research Council in 2001, here is their recommendation for broad areas of long-term goals for students who have autism. Social skills development, first and foremost, it's one of the core deficits. Receptive and expressive communication long-term goals. It's a core deficit in autism. Remember my behavioral view of autism and the three main deficits? Social and communication were two of the three. Engagement and flexibility in developmentally appropriate tasks and play. Fine and gross motor skills. Cognitive and academic further down the list. Replacement behaviors for problem behavior. And independence and organizational skills. So that's a handful of long-term goals. Let me show you my recommendation for how to kind of consolidate those into a base. Here's what I strive for in long-term goals. A social goal, a communication goal, an independence/behavioral goal, and then an academic goal at the bottom in priority listing in most cases. Or social and communication can be equally important. For a child who has autism, they're probably going to need social goals to have friendships and play with their friends, right? If they have impairments in their language, they're going to need long-term goals around communication. If you have a student who is higher functioning and their language is more in the normal range, or in the normal range, Asperger's, for example, they might not need a communication long-term goal at all because their language is in the normal range, in which case you can delete communication skills, but then I would combine it above and I would call it social communication. They still need to work on communication, but it's in the context of their social skills. Independence behavioral. Behavioral is if you happen to have a student who does have problem behavior, you probably do want a long-term goal to address that. But as I said this morning, just because you have autism doesn't mean you have problem behavior. In the absence of problem behavior or concurrent with problem behavior, I think it's important to have an independence goal, right? Starting to think that long-term perspective of are we getting ready for high school and are we getting ready for life after high school? How can we address independence from the get-go? And this can be hard to do, especially in the younger grades where it's really quite pleasant to be walking hand in hand down with a little kid down the hallway. Right? I can be walking hand in hand with a grade 1 student with autism, and I'm having as much fun as he's having. But then I have to stop and realize I'm not holding anyone else's hand in grade 1. Oh, but everyone likes it. It's nice. Well, it is nice. That's not the issue, though, right? Just because it's nice and it doesn't feel bad to me or to you, we are actually inadvertently stigmatizing to some degree. We are not fostering independence because we are just doing more for the student. It's a bit of handicapism, right? It is that ism. We are treating this person differently because they have their diagnosis, because they're not communicating the same way as their other kids. So I often do that social validity check and pause and think, okay, the way I'm treating this kid right now, my student with autism, is that how I'm treating all of his peers? And if it's substantially different, I am probably making a mistake. I should be reflecting on that. And again, this can be a hard message for people. I remember talking about this with a grade 2 or 3 student, and they've been with his SEA for years. They like walking down the hall hand in hand. When I suggested that they don't do that, that's heartless. That's horrible. Why would you stop this? This is nice. I know it does sound heartless. I'm sensitive to that. I know you like it. And when he wants to do that with me, I like it. But I'm not doing that with any of his friends. And the point is, we're doing it because it's nice, not because he needs it. And we're actually fostering dependence as opposed to increasing his independence. So we have to stop and think about these things. Fine and gross motor, these are typically built into academics, right? Early on in elementary school, if you're cutting, pasting, gluing, tracing, coloring, drawing, that's all fine motor. And so I don't necessarily find there are exceptions to every rule. In some cases, there's a complete logical argument to have a long-term goal for motor skills, but quite often, if it's not a substantial deficit, they can be integrated into other areas. You're still addressing them. But you're keeping your IEP a little bit leaner and meaner in terms of long-term goals. So that's what I strive for in my IEPs. 4 long-term goals. To me, it subsumes everything that the National Research Council recommends, but just making it a bit more manageable. And if a student is doing really well and has excellent communication skills, then long-term goals 1 and 2 get amalgamated into just social communication, and now you're down to 3. For some of my kids in high school who are particularly high functioning, it might get reduced to 2. They typically maintain a social goal and maybe an academic goal because they're doing so well that they're in all the regular classes, it makes sense to have an academic goal. Or actually, if they're doing that well that they don't have any special accommodations, they don't need an academic long-term goal because they're just meeting the curriculum outcomes in their classes. So over time, these can be whittled down, is my point.